Well, I think he has delivered exactly what we expected him to deliver, what you and I have been talking about for 12 years or more. And that is, he's brought a businessman's perspective to the running of government. It's been over 100 years since we've had a businessman, and the only one was Hoover, quite frankly. But what you're seeing now is the quietest, most effective revolution that you, I, and my fellow consorts, doesn't matter who they are, implemented through the ascendancy of Trump and his family. Trump doesn't need to do this. His family doesn't need to do this. What he is doing is exactly what I do or others do in the business community. We come in, we clear out an institution in ASAP time. That means you don't have a chance to protest or any time to drive an anti-defamation. That's correct. And I think I think everybody has to understand, the State of the Union is fine. We're not in a civil war. Number one, there is no civil war initiated by the left or the press. What's happening is you're hearing the gurgling of a dying institution, both in the media and in the left wing.
But you agree?
Well, they can sell whatever they want, but they can't mimic or ape what you and I and a group of others have done very quietly, very sotto voce, what we effectively did way before that they had any idea that was coming in. And actually, we have to thank Hillary for being so incompetent, as well as her $100 million coterie.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, my God. On the contrary, I want to thank Hillary. I want to thank the Dewey Square Group. I want to thank all of those who were paid off and were totally, completely incompetent. Every Democrat, every newspaper, and every piece of content that had a narrative that was a kumbaya narrative.
Isn't it their arrogance that made America finally reject them?
Well, it's not only their arrogance. It really is, Alex, as you and I know, competency. You and I share, as we do with millions of other Americans, we're small business people. We're anything but close to 500 million. As a matter of fact, well, that's correct. I mean, that's a great way to say it. But honestly, we're not bankers. We're not VCs. We're not sycophants. We're not parasites. What you have seen is the end of an era of parasites.
And Trump knows.
You hit it on the head, Alex. You and I talked about it. I wrote a blog years ago that the greatest national security problem we have in the United States is not our debt. It's not even ISIS. It's the fact that family farmers are less than 6% of our country. No one is going into the family farm business because it's too hard. I have friends who work 18-hour days, 7 days a week. We don't see that in the upper crust. We don't see that in the Hillarys. We don't see that in the Washington Post. I don't see that in the bankers at Goldman Sachs or Lloyd Blankfein, who comes in and defies an order on immigration.
But we are seeing.
Actually, I'm very impressed. And as a physician, I'm a little bit worried about a man who's a little bit younger than myself, who has this kind of energy, goes 18 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I was about to say.
Well, he may be the oldest in terms of age, but he is the youngest in terms of attitude.
No, I agree.
Ethos and eagerness.
Yeah, I mean, I hate that.
Well, it's what you said, Alex. It's what we worked at. It's what millions of your listeners have heard all over the world. This is the American Revolution. I talked about it. I wrote about it 20 years ago in fiction and in blog. You made it possible. Roger Stone made it possible. A bunch of others. But this is a real secondary revolution. It's not filled with guns. It's not filled with hatred. It is simply a concept called change. And America is frightened because for too long we had a...
Dr. Pieczenik, your Skype degraded. I'm going to reconnect with you because it's totally degraded.
Well, let me put it this way. This is far bigger than just an American Revolution. It's something that you and I talked about. The breakup of the EU is imminent. I've said it for years. Theresa May, Prime Minister of England, did the smartest thing possible, came to see Trump, said that they're going to negotiate a separate agreement with Trump. Prime Minister of Japan, Abe, came to see Trump. South Korean ambassadors are coming to see Trump. What's happening now is that America has redefined its position in the world, taken out of the notion of the multilateral context, which was really not to our advantage. All the membership that we had in all these WTO, United Nations, was worthless. We were spending countless numbers of billions of dollars for absolutely nothing. And Trump looked at the problem. He saw what we had to do. We had to withdraw and reconfigure ourselves into a position of power. We're not isolationists. This is not a
your Skype, bro.
Thank you, Alex, and I do apologize for the Skype. It's not interference from anybody else, but just my incapacity to run. Let me make it clear. This is not about self-congratulation. There's nothing here where we who were part of this revolution, including the Trump family, are successful. Success really gets defined on a continuous basis. What's happened is Trump and Bannon and the others have understood very clearly. We've taken out every civilian who has in the past or will in the future create an unnecessary war. How was that done? Well, that was done, paradoxically, by putting in generals and military men who've been in combat, who understand that we're wasting our men and resources on wars that make no sense, i.e., you have James Mattis, you have Kelly, you had Flynn, you have a whole group of these generals, Pompeo, who all were trained in the art of war. Now, in contrast, you had the liberals or the Obamas, the Clintons, the Bill, the Hillarys, the Madeleine Albrights, the Condoleezza Rice, all of who came out of a very soft background, which had no consideration about how you do war, how you increase it, how you begin it, how you maintain it, and how you end it. So what we had was the incompetency of civilians, not over just one presidency, two presidents, over decades. We hadn't had a president who'd been in the military since Bush Sr. and James Carter. And it wasn't an accident that under Jimmy Carter and Bush Sr., we were asked to put in more military people in order to stop wars that had occurred. The second part of all of this is we no longer want to be tied to financial transactions which have no benefit to us, the American people.
All right, Doc.
Well, let me just say, when I heard the speech, I cheered. I thought it was to the point, it was brief, and it was comprehensive. Was it surreal? Not really, because when somebody like you or I think about a regime change, which this was, and it's too late for the people on the left or the media or whatever you want to call it, it's too late for them to implement any other changes. All they can do is create obstructions which are not really valid. As you see, the Schumers who start to cry and it's disingenuous, or the blank fines who raped our government and our people from Goldman Sachs, and they're complaining. The reality is those days are over. And what we will see now is the breakup of the government, and it's beginning with the State Department, where I'd work, which I said.
And what's crazy?
That's correct. And that whole concept that I'm going to do it, and subsequently you Americans or wherever you're involved, you have to pay the price. No one has realized that particular issue, and that's what the press doesn't understand. That's what the Hillarys don't understand. The Democrats don't understand. There are consequences. The consequences have been obviated for too long. Under the Clintons, under the Bush, all that stuff was nonsense because it was covered up. There was a lot of covert operations. But what we've done is to bring all of the problems up to the surface. Trump has done that, and he said, okay, now analyzing these problems, this is the way to go. We're going to make the government smaller, which by definition should have been smaller. We're no longer going to have 1 million people on the Pentagon supporting 1 million soldiers. That's not going to work. We're no longer going to have 20,000 foreign service officers who really don't do very much.
Sure. What do you make of
democracy or anything else? And we're going to take that down. So by self-definition, the people will select themselves out if they think they can protest against Trump. I don't have a problem with that. That's your right. But the consequence is you can't hide behind anonymity the way the State Department officials are trying to do. They want to have their change and the counterbalance to Trump, but they don't want to be named. I would rather have them named and said, okay, you don't have to work here. We don't have to pay you for 20 years of being in the Foreign Service. I'm not sure what you've done. I'm not clear what the outcome is. And quite frankly, this is what I used to do in management. And we used to get rid of people one after another. Now, the system is not used to the sweeper or the cleaner. And that's really what Trump has been doing. And people like yourself or myself, we can articulate the point of view, we implement it, but then what happens, it becomes infectious. The Hillarys and the Clintons and everybody else becomes irrelevant. What becomes relevant is that we become the focal point for England. Now the biggest problem is...
No, I agree.
Well, I wrote the article about Bannon. It's not the first time. It's really the second time where I support a man like Stephen Bannon. He's born of the Democratic left, pro-labor, pro-Democrat, came out of Norfolk, Virginia. But thanks to his own desire to make something of himself, he went to Virginia Tech, then got a master's degree at Georgetown, then volunteered to go into the Navy, became an officer in the Navy, was involved in surface warfare, and then decided to Goldman Sachs to make money, left Goldman Sachs, and then started a business in Hollywood. Now, that's a polymath individual. To me, that's what America's about. It's not a straight road to anything.
It's about Renaissance men.
I'm sorry?
It's about Renaissance men.
Oh, yeah, but on the other hand, it's about America. Every American, in a way, is a Renaissance person because they have the ability to decide what they want to do. They don't have to stick to one profession. They're no longer geared to be one thing, like the Foreign Service or the CIA, where you put 25 years in and then you get a pension. Those days are gone. The pensions won't be there. That's the sad news for America. But the people who are entrepreneurial, like the Steve Bannons, like yourself and others, those are the ones that will flourish. Well, when you put that uncertainty into the system of being entrepreneurial, which is the basis of this country, then all kinds of things happen.
Sure, let's walk through.
Well, it's not an issue. I differ from you in a little way because I know the people who are protesting. But if you think about the protest, women getting together and protesting that we are women and we want liberated freedom or whatever, it's not relevant. It was so awkward and so basically inept that it didn't really address the question of change in the federal government. It's not about abortion. It's not about your rights to have or not have a child. It was so out of tune. It was as if they were playing an instrument in another chord, in another time, and another way.
I agree.
I don't want to get into the psychiatric mode. What I call themselves is what I called Hillary, Condoleezza, and Madeleine Albright, inept, untutored. They were basically people who came out of the so-called elite schools of either Stanford or Harvard or whatever, and they thought that was sufficient and necessary just to keep them for the rest of their life. That wasn't the case. The simple case is you can protest whatever you want. You have to articulate it, but it's not relevant to the United States because the real people who voted for Trump were exactly the people whom we've talked about and who listened to the Alex Jones
And you
show.
said this.
It's as simple as that. I mean, you're going to Los Angeles. I worked in Los Angeles. It's not real. I mean, there's a movie called La La Land, which is terrible, but they think this is a representation what they're about. It's literally not relevant to the way of life in America. Once Hollywood was relevant, it is no longer relevant because of the internet, because of the Alex Jones, because of the webinar. So what's happening is you're seeing arcane systems disappearing in very quick time. Well, they're not sunk completely, but they're getting water on board. They are sinking very rapidly. It's more kind of the death of an elephant.
Could they?
Yeah, that's a good point, Alex, because if you see a guy like Bannon who came out of the Democratic left and came out of pro-labor and all, and switched, he went to the side where he understood that real America was not about elitism. It was about work, about achievement and failure. That was not inherent in the left, where it had labor unions, where you had a steady income, where you had a pension. Those days are gone. The notion of consistency and security, that's gone for the individual. For the nation, no, because we grew and we did our best when we had to develop technology, when we had to take great risks, and that's where we are right now.
Well, it's just like
Well, we have to be patient. The initial incision by the surgeon, Trump, doesn't necessarily mean that the operation's successful. Like any operation where we literally are changing the metabolism and the state of the patient, which is what America's in, we have to wait for the completion of the operation. Who are the people who will implement the change? How good are they really? How effective are they? Is Trump going to monitor that? And those are the kind of things that we have to watch out for. So the revolution has just begun. But remember, in every revolution, those of us who are the flame keepers or who initiated like yourself and your people will be watching. It's not a given right now.
Sure, Bannon.
Let me make this very clear. Every one of us has narcissism. There's what we call malignant narcissism. There's what we call healthy narcissism. In the case of Trump right now, he is manifesting a very healthy amount of narcissism, saying, look, I'm going to change, but it's not only me.
Sure, but what's what?
Well, the connotation, when you have a leader as strong-willed as Trump, you also have the notion of the higher, and I don't mean it in a negative way about Trump, but the higher the monkey climbs, the further he falls. One of the things that Trump has to watch out for is what we call in the business idealization and devaluation. That means everyone he meets, or however great he is, the higher he goes and the higher he claims somebody else goes, the further it is possible for someone like me or others to devalue him. So there's an inherent failure issue within success, and that's something that Trump and his people have to understand, particularly Jared, Ivanka, and the Goldman Sachs boys. They can't go out of too far ahead of the course or the revolution. Otherwise, the revolution will come back to bite them. That's an inherent part of every revolution that I've studied, involved in. And so what we tend to do in the more effective regime changes, we lower the flame, we keep it far more quiet, and we make sure that our potential opponents can be successful in certain ways. It's not the greatest thing to make sure that we have defeated anyone. We haven't defeated anyone. These are part of America. They're
all part of.
Well, the point is, remember, this is just the beginning, my friend. And in the beginning, there are many things that look very, very positive. But like anything else, as you have repeatedly stated, he is only a human. He knows that. His capacity is limited by the fact you only have 24 hours a day. He gets tired. He has people who are beyond his family reach. He has to depend on others whose ideas are not his and have countervailing.
Sure. Well,
remember this, Alex. We have many leaders in the military who've also been on duty 24/7. They have countervailing points of view. And I would certainly caution or put a very pleasant advice to Trump and his people to accede to those military generals who see things differently. In other words, don't assume that everything he does may be the only way to do it. Do understand that the people...
Well, I mean, he let...
Well, you have to remember that whatever was the institution is gone. How we got there, it's a multi-level issue. It was pensions, it was unions, it was all kinds of covert promises and overt promises. But the reality is we're coming into a new era where literally a businessman and an executive has taken over a company called America. Now, people say you can't run America like you run a company. That's not true. There are many things that we can do as business people where we can change the nature of our...
But I mean, why?
Well, it's a business because we began as a business. We started with a revolution called the Tea Party. Every one of our founding fathers was in the business of real estate or tobacco or cotton. And every one of our subsequent entrepreneurs came out of the fact that we created, in part with England, the Industrial Revolution. We are now in the process of deciding which countries we want to do business with, which countries we do not want to do business with, which countries...
Which is part...
Well, yeah, that's correct. Basically, what we're doing now is we're negating on the notion that we've absolved ourselves of responsibility in the past, meaning we're no longer going to acquiesce to some group of 110 different nations which may or may not contribute to world peace or the weather or
Saudi Arabia.
And now what's going to happen, despite the fact that Trump has businesses in Saudi Arabia, the following countries will be in serious trouble. And I'm not throwing that out as a threat. I'm just saying it's evident. One is Saudi Arabia. They have an unemployment rate among their youth of over 40%. Next is Qatar, then Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Then you go into Turkey, which has trouble. Then you're going into Germany, which
Hold on, dude.
Well, the biggest problem besides the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and the Sunni countries will be China. And it's not an issue of a military confrontation. It's an issue that President Xi, who is really what we call a princeling, the son of a major revolutionary, really can't handle the economy, which is totally messed up. There is a huge outflow of cash that's going into the United States and elsewhere. He has a major devaluation of the yuan. He has companies that are so corrupt that they're making up numbers for the bonds that they're selling in the trillions of dollars, and he has political unrest. What that means for the United States is that we're not going to war. We simply have to stabilize and help him to stabilize his own government before he thinks that an external war can help him out. The truth of the matter is that China is both economically and politically very fragile. They have no water. They have to depend on the Himalayas and the water that goes into India. If there's going to be a war, my prediction would be that it would be between India and China over water rights, because China has less than over 500 million people have no water. Then you go into the countries in the EU. England is going to drop out. Germany now has to hold the basis of the foundation of the EU. France is in a terrible shape. Spain is in terrible shape. Greece is in terrible shape. Italy, Portugal, terrible shape. The one country that seems to be cleaning itself out even better than we have is Brazil. Brazil has indicted its former president, Lula. The president before that is vice president now.
And they're having...
Correct. And the Brazilians are lovely people. They're not aggressive. They're wonderful Catholic from Portugal. And they have effectively neutralized four of their senior people and are continuing to do that in their Congress. So I see a very optimistic future for Brazil. I do not see one for Venezuela. He should be taken out.
What about Cuba?
The head of it. Argentina will come back up, and other Latin American countries as well, hopefully Chile.
What happens with Cuba?
Is America will still be the lodestar for most of the countries around the world, not because we're going to send troops, but simply because of the model that we're instituting now of an internal revolution without violence becomes a very important paradigm for people all over the world. It started an Arab Spring in Egypt. It didn't succeed there because, in turn, the military had to be put in. But now what the world is going to watch is how effectively Trump and his people can literally make change.
1776 worldwide.
I'm sorry?
Couldn't you call it 1776 worldwide?
Yeah. I think it's a valid point. This is more significant in any ways than, well, I can't say more. It's equal to the one.
It's a continuum, as you said.
1776, because we're literally in the 21st century where the new commodity and the new way of relating is through binary numbers.
Sure. And that original root, though, of 1776 now is into the mighty tree. Thank you, Dr. Pieczenik. StevePieczenik.com. Find his books and more there. Thank you, sir. I'm going to come right back and introduce Paul. Plus, I got